Welcome to TechSnap, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems, network, and administration. What? Weird. Okay. How am I messing this up today? See this like every week. One more time.
Have you had your coffee?
I do have some right here next to me. Ah, coffee. All right. Once more. Sorry, Beard. Welcome to TechSnap, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems, network, and administration podcast. This is episode 335, broadcast in front of a live IRC and Discord audience. This episode is brought to you by our three excellent sponsors, Ting, DigitalOcean, and IX Systems. My name is Wes, and joining me this week, it's the one and only, the man who's just an image this week. We've got some ongoing technical difficulties, but that won't stop him from presenting you with all the facts you know and love. That's right, it's Dan. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Hello, Wes. There is no truth to the rumor that I've run out of T-shirts.
No, don't worry. That's not the reason that we can't see you.
That's not the reason.
Well, what's new in your world besides plenty of T-shirts?
I'm about to reboot that server that I swapped all the 3 terabyte drives out for 5 terabyte drives. And I started a thread on Reddit's Home Lab to talk about come up with reasons why it won't boot. And one of the reasons I mentioned was that it's now 5 terabyte drives, and not all drives present 512 byte sectors. Some drives may be 4K, but they emulate 512 bytes.
Okay, yes.
And some BIOSes cannot handle 4K only sectors. It's written right into the BIOS. And I'm now trying to track down whether or not that is strictly a BIOS issue or whether it's a bootloader issue of the OS.
I see. So if there's anything you can do about it, or without having to get a new motherboard.
Well, right. The way I got around it on one server that I'm working with is I installed the OS and the 2 SSDs in that box. And that's always an option. Just toss a couple of SSDs in.
Hey, that's never a bad thing, right?
Never.
Excellent. Okay.
And what else? Oh, I use the textual OSX IRC client.
Okay.
And just upgraded to 7.0.2, and it was crashing. And the dev said, turn off iCloud syncing. And since then, it hasn't crashed.
So you're back on IRC. Look at
you. I'm back on IRC, and it's stable again.
Excellent. That's good to hear. Okay, well, I guess we can start the top of the show today. We've got a great show coming up, lots of stuff to talk about. But first, something that I don't use very much. I don't know about you, Dan. Extended file attributes.
Well, I've never used it directly that I know of. I know I've used it indirectly because I think it's IOCage, a jail manager. The previous version was a shell-based jail. The new one is a Python-based jail manager. But I know the previous one and possibly the new one both use extended extended file attributes on ZFS to set the attributes of that particular jail. And I know that there's a ZFS snap utility which does the same thing. You set the attributes on the file, on the data set, and that determines how the software treats that data set, how often it snaps it, how long it keeps it, stuff like that. But that's not what we're talking about in general. What we're talking about in general is an attribute of the file system that is available to users. Why might that be interesting to you? Well, that's what we're going to find out about. Now, have you used extended file attributes?
You know, I think yes, but it's been very occasionally. I think you're right. I did play with that a little bit when I was playing with IOCage. I think I used it like 10 years ago when I was setting up. I can't even remember. It's been so long.
Yeah. Well, I've never given it much thought, but then someone posted this article or brought my attention to this article, and I started looking at it. And while I don't have a direct need for it now, I figured that if we went over this article and said, this is what you can do with it, someone might say, oh my God, that's exactly what I need.
That's a great point. Yeah, definitely. Sometimes you don't know that, you don't know the tools that are right in front of you. Someone points it out, and there you go.
Yep. Well, on that thought, there's a feature of the Freshports website which depends entirely upon the error doc. When an Apache gets a 404,
Oh, right. Okay. Yes.
it redirects to this error handling routine. It says, "Hey, listen, did you type in something sort of wrong? Let me redirect you over here, which may be what you're looking for. And if it's not, here's a list of items which are similar to what you're looking for." And that's what PHP.NET does. And I got that idea while listening to a lecture by Rasmus, and said, "Oh my God, that's what I need." So anyway, that's an aside. Now back on, pardon me, onto extended file attributes. I got really bad allergies today.
I'm sorry to hear that.
It'll get better.
Yes, winter is coming.
So, it is, but season 8 is a long way away.
Indeed.
So, the name of this article on linuxmag.com is Extended File Attributes Rock. Now, they sort of go into how the amount of data that we have is growing tremendously, but the size of the file is not necessarily growing at the same rate, meaning the number of files is growing rapidly, but the amount of data that we're storing in each file isn't really changing much. It's sort of still staying small. So how do we manage all of this data in files? And while the answer to that question is complex, one place we can start is with extended file attributes. So what they're getting at here is we've got a lot more data. How can we use extended file attributes to manage that data? So they go back to this year's FAST Usenix conference on file system and storage technologies. Now, by this year, they mean 2011. That's when this article is from. So they're talking about a paper which talked about file systems. They did some studies from 2000 to 2010. The median file size isn't changing. The average file size is larger, and the average file system capacity tripled in those 10 years. So the average file system is bigger. What they mean by the median file size hasn't changed, what that means is that if you were to sort all of the files in your file system according to size, the one in the middle of the list is the same now as it was in 2010. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's interesting to know. But the average file size is larger, so I guess
the average, yes. So there are more files, but they're larger. It sort of says like every one of us has has more than the average number of eyes in the population.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have 2, you're above average.
Exactly. Fun with math on today's TechSnap.
Yes, we do stats here. I think I actually read that somewhere recently on Reddit, something like that. So now, one of the keys to data management is being able to monitor the state of your data, which usually means monitoring the following metadata. Fortunately, POSIX gives us some standard metadata for our files, such as the following: file ownership, UID and GID. Almost everyone who admins a box knows about user ID and group ID. This is just general Unix type stuff. File permissions, such as world, group, and user. Usually that's sorted the other way around. It's owner, group, and other is what I usually see that sorted as. A time, C time, M time. Most systems I know turn off A time, which is access time. C time is when it was created, and M time is when it was modified. And then, of course, file size and file name. And is it a file or is it a directory? So all of that stuff is readily available to you. Now, what most people don't realize is there's actually a mechanism for adding your own metadata, like extending the metadata that we just covered.
Say what?
This is called what?
What?
Yes. This is called extended file attributes. In Linux, many file systems support it, such as ext234, JFX, XFS, blah, blah, blah.
That's a lot of them.
So there's a lot of them. And some of the file systems have restrictions on those extended file attributes, such as the amount of data that can be added, but they do allow for the addition of user-controlled metadata. So on Linux, there are 4 namespaces for this data. So there's user, trusted, security, and system. And this article concentrates only on the user namespace because it has no restrictions with regard to naming or contents. The system namespace could be used for adding metadata controlled by root. So let the users manage their own metadata, but if you as a systems administrator is doing this and want to rely on this metadata and make sure that it's accurate, then use the system namespace. Don't use the user namespace. Leave that to the users. Oh, and while I think of it, not all backup and copy tools will preserve this extended metadata.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Extended metadata. So if you're doing, I think I recall seeing CPIO mentioned. Now I don't know if that's been fixed since, because this is a 2011 article. But if you rely upon this metadata, make sure it's still there after you copy it off and copy it back on or back it up. Make sure your backup tool preserves it. Otherwise, when you go and restore it, well, you're screwed.
Exactly.
So the user attributes are meant to be used by the user and any application run by that user. The user namespace attributes are protected by the normal user permission settings on the file, meaning if you can set it, anyone else who can touch the file can set it as well. If you have write permissions on the file, generally I think you can set an extended attribute. If you have read permission, you can read that attribute. To give you an idea of what you can do for names for the extended file attributes for this namespace, here are some ideas. User.checksum.nb5, user.checksum.SHA-256. Why would you bother setting the SHA-256 when you can just calculate it? Time. That's the only thing I can think of, time. If you have a 10 gig file, set the SHA-256 if that's something that you need all the time.
Yeah, that actually sounds pretty handy, especially if you have to go, if you're, have some dumb process that's running every so often. I like that idea.
User.originalAuthor. So you've got, say, a document, and the current owner is J. Doe, but the original author was Foo Bar. All right. User.application. What application uses this file? User.project. User.comment. Comment is a really good idea. Now, what tools do we have for extending file attributes? So they go through several different tools here, and it's mainly setting and getting those extended attributes. And they talk about the ATR package that comes with most distributions. Some OS have it built into the OS, but generally there's an ATR package. And there's also a lib ATR package as well. This is specific to Linux. Now, there are other bits here where they talk about how you do it on other systems. Let's see here. Let me jump over to the Wikipedia article, because that had some interesting stuff in it as well, just a comparison of the different things. And here it is. So on AIX, they supported the get EA command. So the get EA, set EA, EA presumably meaning extended attributes.
That would make sense.
FreeBSD 5 and later, it's EX ATR, extended attribute. Under Linux, it's generally ATR, get FATR, set FATR. Those are all from the ATR package. OS X even has this, and they generally use, they're not mentioning the commands here. Oh, OS2 had it. Anyone still using OS2? I want to hear from you. OS2 is pretty cool.
That would be great.
Solaris has it. Windows NT has it. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, but it's just a list.
You know, I definitely have encountered it back in the days on Mac OS X. Let's look there. Looks like it's from the command line. It's xatter
Yeah.
on OS X, but you know, there they use resource forks as well, and I remember having issues with a lot of the
Yes.
BSD userland commands that they've they use there, not having support for those. So I think in particular, instead of using rsync, I had to use, or instead of something, I had to use the ditto command to make sure that those all got copied correctly when I was doing drive imaging and then other things.
What's a ditto command? Is that like a copy IO or
Yeah, let's see. It's been like 10 years since I've done that.
the tools that you go back and look at when you no longer need them? I I I know I've talked about.
Yeah, here we go. Ditto
Yep.
is a slightly more advanced form of CP, but it preserves ownership attributes and permissions as
Hmm.
well as file resource forks and file and folder metadata. So there you go.
Huh. So I'll run through some of the commands that they've got here for an example. So they say, let's create a file called test.txt and put some content in it called the quick brown fox. So they've done that. And now let's add some extended attributes to this file. So what they run is set fatr -n user.comment -v. This is a comment test.txt. So basically it's set fatr -n for the attribute that you're setting, and then -v for the content that you're setting and the file name. So this command sets the extended file attribute to the name user.comment. That's a really bad sentence. The -v option is the value of the attribute followed by that value, and the final option of the command is the name of the file. So what do you do to get that back? You use get fatr, and back comes file :test.txt and user.comment. You can do I think you can do a file, a get fatter -q. I know I tried this on FreeBSD the other day, and it just brings back the results. Oh no, sorry. If you just do, I read this wrong. Get fatr file name will list all the extended attributes on that file. But if you want to get a particular value, you do get fatr -n, the name of the attribute, and then the file, and it'll bring that back. And that's that get fatr -qn, I'm sure will not give you the extra metadata. In other words, it'll just give you the value instead of the key equals value.
Oh yeah,
pair.
that seems pretty handy for scripting and other purposes.
Oh, yeah. You need that sort of stuff. I know that's ZFS. Well, hold on. Have we gone a show yet without mentioning ZFS?
I'm not sure.
Are people getting sick of hearing about ZFS?
I mean,
They must be the people not using ZFS.
we talk about Btrfs too, and some other file systems. Maybe we can do
Okay.
something about XFS in the future.
Yeah.
But if so, I mean, please let us know. It's just hard because it's so good.
Let us know. So there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do in here. As I mentioned, you could say, okay, this directory doesn't get backed up. You could set that right on that directory. This file, ignore it. Do not back it up. I know that some file systems have an attribute for not backing up. No dump attribute, I think, is what it is called.
Mm-hmm.
But that goes back to the days of where you would dump a whole disk. Yeah. So.
Yeah, one
I'm
use
sure
that comes to my mind is like, I wonder, you could set a series of attributes that showed like provenance as a file was passed between various services, maybe showing that they've been processed and by what process. Interesting. Yeah, you're right. Like I definitely can start thinking of some things. It's so handy that it lives, with the file on the file system. So if it's going to be, as long as you're taking care to copy it to another file system that supports it with a process that will preserve that information. You don't have to have an extra file. You don't have to have other things. It'll just be right there.
What you just said reminds me of email headers.
Tell me more.
Well, as an email goes from A to B, the headers in that email are
right.
not appended to, but prefixed to. So you receive the email, and then at the start of the email, you say, hey, I received this message from here at this time. And that's just how the email structure goes on. But, and you couldn't really store that in a file attribute, but it is the same idea.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting.
Hmm.
Huh. Well, extended attributes, it seems like a lot of fun. I'd be curious to hear from our audience if anyone has any use cases they use, in their day-to-day life, at work,
Yep.
at home.
Mm-hmm.
And if you come up with something clever because of it, let us know about that too.
Yeah. Especially if what we've said here has given you an oh my God moment and you've rushed off to do something with it. Let us know what that is,
Dan
because
hopes so.
that's what we're here for.
Exactly. Anything else you want to add?
No, thank you.
Okay, well then, let's jump into our first sponsor tonight. That's our friends over at iX Systems. Head on over to ixsystems.com/TechSnap. There you will find the definitive guide for buying hardware for open source software. How do you know it's definitive? It's because it's from iX. They've been doing this a long time. They've seen, .com bubbles come and go, and they've been here throughout it. They've got a huge number of great partnerships, especially with people like Intel with their incredible Intel processors. So you're getting the best bang for your buck in whatever you buy from iX. Head to their website. You'll see, right here, you can just see some of the companies iX works for. People like NOAA, UC Berkeley, Tumblr, Hitachi, Splunk, Groupon, LinkedIn, the U.S. government, and governments all around the world. That's another way you can know that they're serious about what they do. And what they do is provide amazing custom hardware and storage solutions that are really first rate in the whole industry. Whether you need, an entirely custom new server or storage array for your growing business, or you just want to get serious about home backups, iX Systems is the place to look. Start out looking at the FreeNAS Mini. You just click learn more. It'll take you to a page all about it. You can go buy it on Amazon, especially if you're a Prime member and you need some fast storage, or you can order it and configure it and buy it right on the iX website. If the web, buying things on the web isn't for you, or you just want to, be sure you're getting exactly the right configuration, that's another way iX Systems stands out. They've got a great staff of super talented sales engineers. Emphasis on the engineer there. They're really, they know exactly what's going on. They've worked with great companies, and they're prepared to be your partner with white glove service, helping you to understand your problem, helping to make sure that your solution is the custom solution that you deserve and that matches your problem, and will solve it in the most cost-effective, efficient way. So whether you need, particular hardware, a motherboard that'll make sure it'll fit this number of extension cards and will have this amount of upgradability or this many sockets, doesn't matter. iX has done it. They've seen it. They've built it. And if not, they're going to be excited too because, hey, this is a lot of fun, and they're experts in their field. They've also got, they're also like community members. That's another thing. You don't have to worry that this is some company that no one's heard of or that they're out of the blue. No, they are at all the conferences. You can find them. They've got social media presence, and they've got a great blog. They've always got stuff going on over at the blog, whether it's, new server releases, like iX Systems has released new servers built on the new Intel Xeon scalable processors. Hey, that sounds great. Or they're talking about some conference that's upcoming or that they've been to, or another cool open source project that they're helping or that they're trying to highlight. That's another way iX is different than just about every other provider. So if you're looking for some new hardware, you're looking for a crazy amount of storage, or you're just looking for some technical guidance, check out ixsystems.com. Go to ixsystems.com/TechSnap. Take a look at that white paper. Give it to someone, whether you're looking to buy new hardware or someone else in your company or life is. Let them know about iX, and thank you to iX for sponsoring this here TechSnap program. All right, so moving on. What do you have for us next today?
Speaking of iX Systems, they were at VMworld. Is it VMworld?
Yeah,
Is that
I think
the
so.
big? It's on right now. One of my coworkers there, was there, and he stopped by and snagged T-shirts for us all.
It seems like there's a lot going on there. There
There
with
is,
new
there is.
AWS partnerships, and Google's
Yep.
looking at doing the same.
Yep.
Good days for VMware.
So anyway, back.
Yes, we've got other things to talk about.
Internet privacy.
Uh-oh.
Now, one of the first guys that I started reading about when it came to security was, and I always mangle his name, I'm sorry, is Bruce Schneier. And Bruce does a lot of really good stuff, a lot of very interesting approach to security, and not just computer security, but physical security. And one of his big terms that he uses often is security theater. But in this post, it's the Harvard Gazette that has gone and talked to him about internet privacy. And I'll just start off by reading the first 3 paragraphs of this article, because, we talk about privacy a lot on here, and it is more important than people think. It's not just, I don't have anything to hide. The point is, yes, you do. You probably just aren't aware of why it should be hidden. And history has shown that if this information is out there, it can and will be misused.
Exactly.
So, in the internet era, consumers seem increasingly resigned to giving up fundamental aspects of their privacy for convenience in using their phones and computers, and have grudgingly accepted that being monitored by corporations and even governments is just a fact of modern life. In fact, internet users in the United States have far fewer privacy protections than those in other countries. In April, Congress voted to allow internet service providers to collect and sell their customers' data browsing history. By contrast, the European Union hit Google this summer with a $2.7 billion antitrust fine. To assess the internet landscape, the Gazette interviewed cybersecurity expert Bruce Schneier, a fellow with the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Security and the Balfour Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard Kennedy School. Schneier talked about government and corporate surveillance and about what concerned users can do to protect their privacy. So, back in here. Security is always a compromise between convenience and protection. And people are finding it convenient to do certain things with their phone and are willing to give up the privacy because of that. It used to be anyone that wants to surveil someone really wants to know where that person is at all times. And at the moment, our cell phones do that. Not directly, but
in many ways, indirectly and also sometimes directly.
And a lot of phones have GPS units in it, and I'm not sure if it's completely standard practice, but the cell phone towers know where you are. They can triangulate. It may not be automatic, but it can be done using the information from the various cell phone tower logs. Anyway. Pardon. So, after the Gazette talks about Edward Snowden's revelations regarding the NSA's mass surveillance operations, and believe it or not, that came out 4 years ago. It seems a lot more recent than that, but it's been 4 years.
That's wild.
Since Snowden released his information. That's a long time.
And I don't think we've come as far as we might have hoped back then.
He addresses that very topic. Schneier says Snowden's revelations made people aware of what was happening, but resulted in very little change. The U.S. Freedom Act resulted in some minor changes in one particular government data collection program. The NSA's data collection hasn't changed. That's a very important point. It has not changed. The laws limiting what the NSA can do haven't changed. Let that sink in, folks.
It's pretty much the same.
Yeah, the technology that permits them to do it hasn't changed. So basically, even though we know they're doing it, nothing has changed. Nothing. So the Gazette asks, should consumers be alarmed by this? And Schneier says, hell yes, not in those words, but he says people should be alarmed, both as consumers and citizens. But today, what we might care about is very dependent upon what is in the news at the moment, and right now, surveillance is not in the news. It was not an issue in the 2016 election, and by and large, isn't something that legislators are willing to make a stand on. Snowden told his story, Congress passed a new law, and people moved on. So, stuck here in the middle of the article is some low-tech tips to protect your online privacy. Don't post identifying details into public sites, such as tagging photos online. Okay, because basically when you tag photos on Facebook, it lets people, oh, that's what Dan looks like. Not that I keep it a secret, but you know.
Right, but
Don't
that's
use
what Dan
search.
looks like. That's where
Yep,
Dan was, possibly
yep,
at this time.
yep, yep,
And we
yep,
maybe need some sort of more, at some point, maybe some cultural understanding about the, consent around tagging, or at least
yep.
the potential problems.
Mm-hmm. Use search engines that don't track or store personal information, like DuckDuckGo, just a few miles north of where I am now.
Is that right? Neat.
Yep. They're in Malvern, PA, which
Oh,
is, I could hop in my car, be there in half an hour.
excellent.
They are good. I like them. Turn location services off on your phone when not needed. Organize against surveillance. That is a very important thing. It wasn't too long ago that we talked about politicians saying how many letters do they need from someone in order to take notice of a topic. And it was two. 2 letters on a topic
Wow.
from different people are enough for a politician to take notice, because 1, they can just dismiss as a nutcase. 2 means that there's at least 2 other constituents that are interested in it, and the vast majority of their constituents do not email. So if you're in a particular, I want to say riding because that's a Canadian term, if you're in a particular electoral area,
I like that.
get you and your friend to write to the politician, and they will take notice of that.
Yeah, and what can it hurt, right? You might as well try.
Yeah. Don't email. Email does not have the same significance as a written letter.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So, what's the next low-tech tip? Place a sticker over your computer's camera. I don't have that, but my podcast camera does have a little flap that I can hold down.
I like when that option's there.
That's right there. Oh, and work puts out these little slide things. You can stick it to your laptop.
Those are really
and
neat.
It's a little shutter that slides back and forth, so you can open it and close it. Yeah.
It just seems, like it's it may seem trivial, and in some cases probably is. It's just nice to have, much like hardware switches on a device or other things. It's nice to be able to opt in to using something. I know when I'm going to enable my camera, it's not a big deal to just slide the slide.
My Cisco phone sitting here has a little shutter that I can close over the lens. It's like a twist thing on the camera.
Very nice.
I'm like twist it shut, and it's physically blocked. The camera is still active, but it can't see anything.
Beautiful.
Item number 6, don't use cloud backup. If you do, this is my aside. If you do, encrypt it.
Yeah, I think
because
that's
once you've encrypted it, you're fine.
Right, that's the natural aside. But that's maybe doesn't qualify as low tech, unfortunately.
No. I agree. Don't use Google Calendar, and don't use webmail. Configure your browser to delete cookies.
Okay, yeah, nice.
All right.
Yeah, that one's, I know I've seen some options like delete cookies at the time, like when you close your browser and your session, and that can be pretty handy.
Again, that's convenience.
Exactly.
Cookies are convenient. So now we get into, can we legislate this? And the answer is, my words, hell yes. Right now, the answer is basically anything goes. I'm quoting Bruce now. It wasn't always this way. In the 1970s, Congress passed a law to make a particular form of subliminal advertising illegal because it was believed to be morally wrong. So, pause here. If society feels that something is morally wrong, they legislate it. So, if we as a group believe that is morally wrong, to sell to collect and distribute or sell our personal information, we can legislate that because we as a group believe it's important.
Right. We
That's
get to set the playground here for how this should work.
Yes. We elect the politicians. We tell them what we want. That doesn't always work out very well, does it?
No, it doesn't always, but you're right. And I mean, obviously it has to be a dialogue, and there's probably a happy medium to be found and a compromise, but that dialogue needs to be taking place, and especially consent and transparency definitely need to be involved.
When it comes to transparency, is it the Google Transparency Project? I forget the name of the project, but basically, I think it was done by Fitzpatrick. You can download all of your data and ask for it. Can I have all my data, please? Like all your photos, all your emails, all that stuff. They give it to you in a nice, tidy tarball.
Oh yeah. Google does have that. You're right.
All right. So back to the advertising. That advertising technique, subliminal advertising, is child's play compared to the kind of personalized manipulation that companies do today. The legal question is whether this kind of cyber manipulation is an unfair, deceptive business practice, and if so, can the Federal Trade Commission step in and prohibit a lot of these practices? Personally, I believe they can. It's within their purview. Anyway. Do you remember Facebook did a little bit of manipulation of news feeds to see how people reacted? Like they would supply someone with more good news or more less news or something like that?
Yes, I do remember that.
I know a friend of mine was very personally upset by that because they felt that if perhaps you were like depressed or suicidal, that could be just enough to push you over the edge by seeing that, I'm unhappy. All my friends are unhappy. This is terrible. So kind of psychological manipulation, I thought, anyway.
Right. And without you, okay, well, if you've signed up for it, that's a different matter. But that's not what the normal expectation of the service that you use is, right? I don't think consumers understand that. By a lot of times, like Facebook can do what they want with their feeds. You kind of trust that, like they have an algorithm designed to show me relevant information that's not distorted in some way.
Look up POLA, POLA. It is something called the Principle of Least Astonishment, and it's a human-computer interface operation. Basically, if a necessary feature has a high astonishment factor, it may be necessary to redesign the feature. So that I'm trying to give an example here of where when you upgrade your hard drive, it encrypts it and doesn't give you the key.
Right.
What? I mean, that's astonishing. Why would it do that? So basically, tools should do what you expect and only what you expect, and they shouldn't have unintended consequences. And I think that applies to also using apps. And if I say that I want to see these friends first, I should be seeing everything they post first. But a lot of social media will manipulate it to show you what they want you to see, as opposed to, well, why are you doing this? This isn't fair.
Yeah, definitely. I like that. I think applying that principle makes a good deal of sense. That's a good way to put it that I think a lot of people could understand.
No, thank you. Now, back to what Bruce has to say. Europe has more stringent privacy regulations than the United States. In general, Americans tend to mistrust government and trust corporations. Europeans tend to trust government and mistrust corporations. The result is that there are more controls over government surveillance in the US than in Europe. On the other hand, Europe constrains its corporations to a much greater degree than the US does. US law has a hands-off way of treating internet companies. Computerized systems, for example, are exempt from many normal product liability laws. This was originally done out of the fear of stifling innovation. I wonder if European law is slightly different when it comes to product liability for software.
Yeah, it'd be
So,
interesting to hear about that.
Bruce then said, he's asked, what do you do to protect your privacy online? He carries a cell phone, he shops online, he banks online, he uses credit cards, and he has airline frequent flyer accounts. Perhaps the weirdest thing about my internet behavior is I'm not on any social media platforms. That might make me a freak, but honestly, it's good for my productivity.
Huh. Yeah,
Whereas
that's fair.
I tend to use social media for technical reasons. Like, here's this problem I'm trying to solve. How do I fix it?
Right. I mean,
That's
at the
what a
end of the
lot of
day,
my
it can be
use.
a very, useful way to, share ideas and helpful and actually interact with people. That's the social aspect of it. But that's somewhat different than the, like marketing or
Yeah,
lifestyle, or I don't even know what to call it. But there's that's a different way to use it than a lot of people do.
we're abnormal.
Yes, indeed.
We really are. Most of the people listening to this podcast are not your average person.
And that's just one more reason we love you.
That's not a bad thing.
No, not at all.
That's not a bad thing at all. It's good to not be average. So, what else do you do to protect your privacy online? I've come to the conclusion that email is fundamentally insecurable. If you want to have a secure conversation online, if I want to have a secure conversation online, sorry,
And I
use an
do.
encrypted. Most of us do. I use an encrypted chat application like Signal. By and large, email security is out of our control. For example, I don't use Gmail because I don't want Google having all of my email. But the last time I checked, Google has half my email because you all use Gmail.
Yep.
Yep. This harkens back to what we talked about on the previous show about N+1 encryption protocol.
Yeah, N+1 sec.
Yes, that one. So I'm hoping that comes out soon.
Yeah. So see episode 334 for that one.
Thank you. One sentence in this whole article gives you a lot to think about. No one ever lies to a search engine.
Yep.
What you're putting in there is what you're interested in. I want more information on this. Oh, this person is interested in that. Let's just make a note. Oh, I want to know about this too. Oh, wow, look, they're interested in this too. Okay, put a tick in that column as well. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, I like what they, how they phrase that. And then right after there, also points out that Google knows you, even better because Google has perfect memory in a way that people don't. So not only do they, are they able to build an assessment on it, but they can have the whole history that is amenable to better analysis at any time.
So to finish this review, I'll read the last paragraph of what Bruce has to say. Opting out doesn't work. It's nonsense to tell people not to carry a credit card or not to have an email address. And buyer beware is putting too much onus on the individual. People don't test their food for pathogens or their airlines for safety. The government does it. But the government has failed in protecting consumers from internet companies and social media giants. But this will come around. The only effective way to control big applications is through big government. Oops. My hope is that technologies also get involved in the political process, in government, in think tanks, universities, and so on. That's where the real change will happen. I tend to be short-term pessimistic and long-term optimistic. I don't think this will do society in. This is not the first time we've seen technological changes that threaten to undermine society, and it won't be the last.
Hey, that is a little bit optimistic. I appreciate that. That's often a note we need here on TechSnap.
Oh, yeah. I think, I'm the same way. Short term, it's not going to improve. But long term, I think it will, because more and more people are going to become aware of how important this is. Europe is, I want to say years ahead of us, but yardsticks ahead of us in terms of privacy control.
Yeah, definitely. While you're doing that, I just remember I've seen a couple like there's plugins or other applications that will try to generate some fake data to try to obfuscate some of what you're doing. In effect, lie to Google. I don't know if this one in particular. Here's just one I found called Noisy. Introducing Noisy. Noisy is a browser plugin that creates meaningless web data. Digital noise. It visits and navigates around websites from within your browser, leaving misleading digital footprints around the internet. I don't know if it actually does fake searches or not, but that's just maybe one thing people can consider that might help.
You talking about Noisy reminds me of something I was reading yesterday. ISPs can tell when you're sleeping, when you get up, when you leave for work, all that sort of stuff, and that can be determined basically by the amount of data that leaves your house at what times of the day and where it goes to.
Yeah, the people sitting in their knock surely just see that, right, in the rhythms on the graphs on the wall.
So when you go to bed, there's a lot more data going to your sleep monitoring app, for example. And the way around this is to have a steady stream of data, maybe 40K per second. That's not a lot of data, but just have a steady stream of data going all the time, so everything else gets lost into the background.
Yeah, and then especially if maybe you're already, you tuned into episode 334 and you set up a VPN gateway at your house as well. Mm-hmm. Combining those two things would work pretty nicely, I think.
Just have a constant flow of crap going over it.
Exactly.
And they can see the data's going there, data's coming back, but it just has to be enough to have a lot of data going in it. And that reminds me of what encryption used to be done. Encryption used to be this is an encryption machine that my father worked on, or was a tech for. He installed them. So you would have a machine, a sending machine and a receiving machine at each location. And at the beginning of the shift or the day, you would insert a paper card into this machine. And that paper card was essentially the seed for random noise that would be sent over the line for the entire shift. Now, that's my interpretation is the same card was used at both ends, which meant at the other end, they knew exactly what the noise was, would remove that from the incoming signal, and anything else you got was your actual encrypted message or your unencrypted message. So anyone eavesdropping on it, there would be constant noise all day long. And all you do is you encode your message into the middle of that noise, and then at the other end, you have your message, and nobody knows that a message even went by, let alone what it was.
That's clever. I like that.
It is, incredibly. Anyway, enough of my anecdotes.
Any takeaways you want to have for that very interesting article before we move on?
People have got to get involved with telling their politicians that they don't like the amount of data that's available.
Yeah. And we gotta, we need to, you're right that in some ways it's a moral, philosophical issue. So it's something we need to attack at the cultural level as well. And, communicate this to people in your life. Parents need to teach it to children, other things, that this is, it's a human right. It's a fundamental thing for a free society. We need to have privacy and have a clear and open discussion about what that means.
Yes.
So do that. Get out there and keep watching TechSnap. All right, so if you care about that, you probably also care about freedom of choice, especially when it comes to your wireless service. Head on over to Ting if that's you, techsnap.ting.com. There you'll find a smarter way to do mobile. Why is it smarter? Well, just to tease you, at first, maybe it's smarter because the average Ting bill is just $23 per line per month. Yeah, that's right. And when you go to techsnap.ting.com, you'll get a $25 service credit, which will likely pay for more than your first month of service. How does this work? Is this some sort of crazy internet magic? Well, I mean, yes, but the way it works is because Ting's different. Ting's mobile that makes sense. Ting is pay for what you use. Head on over to their rates page. There you'll find a little bit more about how that works. You can just play around and see what it would be like. Lines start at $6 a month. Yeah, that's it. You have a phone, you have $6 a month, boom, that phone, it's on Ting now. Then you just pay for what you use. So if you don't use any minutes, that's $0 a month. If you don't use any text messages, because, that's just plain text. Are you crazy? Also $0 a month. And then it's just however much data you use. Maybe you use a lot, $26. Maybe you don't use hardly any because you're on Wi-Fi all the time. That's $16 a month. So the price, a meal out, something like that, it's a whole different bar game. It's not $130 a month. Plus, there's no 2-year contracts. You don't have to try to estimate how much data you might need and play that terrible game of trying to buy just amount that you use most of it, but still have enough flex for the months where you go over. Maybe you're traveling. Ting doesn't make you do that. Ting doesn't want you to feel like a child. This is wireless service for adults and rational people. You pay for what you use. You need to use more, just use more. You'll pay for it. And that's fine. That makes it simpler. And you make up for that in the months where you don't use very much, because if you don't use much, you don't pay much. That's the magic of Ting. And don't worry, they've got everything you've come to expect: voicemail, three-way calling, and the best feature for me, tethering. Yeah, that's included. There's no separate magic other bucket of data. There's no extra fees for that. It's just included because Ting makes sense. They have both GSM and CDMA. You get to choose between those, whichever's better in your area. You can bring your own device. They've got an easy page over here, a BYOD. You can check out if your IMEI will work on Ting. I bet you it will. And if you need a new device, head on over to their store. They got a ton of great phones from the latest and greatest Android and iOS things. You can go check out your coverage. Look at that Samsung Galaxy S8, Apple iPhone 7 Plus. They've also got a large amount of bargain phones. So maybe you want a backup phone, you need a phone for a kid that, hey, maybe they're going to break it, or you want to get a MiFi. Home Phone Connect 3 CDMA MiFi from $97. Look at the ZTE Warp Elite, brand new, $89. That's hard to beat. And when you know you're going to save a bunch of money on Ting, hard to beat that too. So techsnap.ting.com. Thank you to Ting for sponsoring the TechSnap program. Okay, thanks, Ting. Now to our final story in today's main segment. We're back with our dear friend, Mr. Troy Hunt.
I like Troy.
Me too.
I do. I'd buy him a beer. So, a few weeks back, we went, we talked about Troy Hunt's huge database that he had released, 309, I think it was. He basically released hashes of all the passwords that he had collected from some of the dumps, and I think it was 300 and some million rows. I've got it in a database here somewhere, but this just dwarfs everything that he had before. So this is just from yesterday, which is probably the day before yesterday, Australia time. But last week I was contacted by someone alerting me to the presence of a spam list, a big one. That's a bit of a relative term, though, because whilst I've uploaded big spam lists into Have I Been Pwned, HIBP, before, the largest to date has been a mere 393 million records and belonged to River City Media. The one I'm writing about today is 711 million records, which makes it the single largest set of data I've ever loaded into HIBP. For a sense of scale, that's almost one address for every single man, woman, and child in all of Europe. This blog post explains everything I know about it. That's a lot.
Yeah, that's definitely a lot. That's a crazy big number.
Yep. It is. It's just,
it's hard
any
to fathom.
website would be proud to have that many users.
Exactly.
So what's in this data? There's two. So I really should give credit to the chap that got in touch with them. Benkow, Benkow, is the chap who contacted Troy. And Troy says he's done some really interesting malware and spam bot analysis in the past. And he had a read of some of the stuff. And one of the things to keep in mind about this dump is there's two important classes of data you need to understand. Email addresses. That's it. Just masses and masses of email addresses used to deliver spam to. In some cases, a single file may contain tens or even hundreds of millions of email addresses. That's just ridiculous. Now, for further reading, have a look at bsdly.com. I think that's at bsdly.com. Is that it? Yes, that's the one. It actually redirects to bsdly.net. This is Peter Henston's webpage. He loves FreeBSD, does a lot of great stuff on it, wrote a book about PF. He also knows a hell of a lot about spam. There's a page there that you can go there and read for advice on what to do. And he talks about trap lists and email harvesting and stuff like that. If people aren't aware, every email has a unique identifier. And generally, it's sort of the form of some random number, often date related, ampersand, the domain that's selling it, that is sending it. Sorry, not selling. So it looks a lot like an email address. And on freshports.org, you can see a lot of that stuff because everything on FreshPorts is generated from an email.
Oh,
which
right.
comes from a commit list. So I think I actually doctored some of the initial ones because when FreshPorts was first set up, it didn't record the message IDs because they weren't important to me at the time. So when I started recording message IDs, I had to put a value in for all the previous, for all the rows in the database that didn't have that value. So I created something at freshports.org. Boom! Started getting spam on these things that looked like addresses but weren't really addresses. So I think I changed it to invalid.freshports.org, which will never resolve to anything. So hopefully that cut that down, but no, it hasn't really. So back to here. The other class of data in this dump is email addresses and passwords. Ben Cow knows that these are used in an attempt to abuse the owner's SMTP server in order to deliver spam. I also believe that many of these may simply be aggregations from various other breach sources, and he goes on to talk about that later. So having an email address and a password gets you into an SMTP server sometimes. And if you can get into an SMTP server authenticated, you can send a lot of spam.
Yeah.
And that's what this crap is for. So he says the first file is from the first extract he shows is from a 14 gigabyte file from the earlier one that he talked about. And in many cases, he found the same data in both the larger file and the subsequent smaller file. Interestingly, as you can see from the suffix above, it's in a uk.txt file or a uk101.txt file, and it has his email address because he finds that interesting because he's certainly not from the UK.
No.
And he has other files that refer to AU, but he's not in that file. And there are no other two-letter country code represented in the file names. But clearly we're talking many millions of email addresses here. A heap of them are from other locations. So take those suffixes with a grain of salt. I'm guessing perhaps maybe uk.txt was they got that file from someone in the UK, and it has no relevance whatsoever to the contents. It's just the name of the file.
Right.
And so then there's another file which has an email address for a New South Wales government organization, mostly related to tolls. And then on the right-hand side of that row, they have email addresses which are predominantly Australian addresses, but there's also 13,000 .ru domains in there. So this email address on the left side is used to send notifications related to e-tag devices. That's like an EasyPass or toll collection device. Yeah, so you can pay the tolls, and he knows because he's gotten emails like that in the past. But he'll take a stab at it and say, there's not many legitimate drivers using the New South Wales toll road system with Russian email addresses.
No, probably not.
How this is connected together, he's not sure. Then someone tweeted that he received a domain alert on this one, went through the process, and it turns out to be an invented sales at domain address. And I actually went through the list for my domains as well, and I found sales at this domain, sales at that domain, sales at another domain, another domain. Those addresses have never been used.
Really?
But it's on, what was that site from? It was from B2B USA Business. So someone's basically, in mid-2017, a spam list of over 105 million individuals in corporate America was discovered online. And it's just referred to as B2B USA Businesses. So people are just making that up because those email addresses never existed. So if you're ever thinking of getting buying a list of spam, keep in mind that most of it's going to be fake.
Yeah.
Or consider that a lot of them may be fake. Now he goes further through it and he finds passwords, basically a password followed by a username. And it was basically one of these files had 1.2 million rows. Now, a random selection of a dozen different email addresses from there confirmed that every single one of them was in the LinkedIn data breach.
Oh.
Now, this is interesting because assuming that's the source, all of those passwords were exposed as SHA-1 hashes with no salt. So it's quite possibly that this is just a small sample of the 164 million addresses that were in there and had readily crackable passwords.
Yeah, interesting. So, like that's just a subset there.
Yes. So following on from what I just read, which is what Troy wrote, if you have readily crackable passwords, there are hashes out there for them. If you have a difficult to crack password, which is not easily found in a hash, you're more secure. So don't be typing in diamonds as your password. Use a password manager and use something random that your password manager creates for you.
Definitely. That's just one of the easiest ways to make sure that, when these inevitable leaks happen, you're at least a little bit protected. You won't have other accounts that are vulnerable, and it's really easy then to go generate a new password, update everything, done.
Now, another file with a similar naming structure contains 4.2 million email addresses and password pairs, this time with every single account having a hit on the massive exploit in combo list. This should give you an appreciation of how our data is redistributed over and over again once it's out there in the public domain. So this massive exploit in list, I'm not actually seeing when this came out, May 2017. So yet another file contains over 3,000 records with email, password, SMTP server, and port, say port 25 or port 587. They're very common. This immediately illustrates the value of the data. Thousands of valid SMTP accounts give the spammer a nice range of email servers to send their messages from. There are many files like this too. Another one contained 142,000 email addresses, passwords, servers, and ports.
That's nuts.
So I can't imagine that this was plucked from a provider, because why would they have ports included? It must have been harvested from individuals.
Yeah, you would think so. Or scanned somehow. I'm not sure, but it's certainly interesting. I can see why it'd be very valuable if you have a bunch of email to send.
Now we're getting down to the conclusion bit here. It goes on and on and on. Email addresses, passwords, and SMTP servers and ports spread across tens of gigabytes of files. It took HIPB 110 data breaches over a period of 2.5 years to accumulate 711 million addresses. And here we go, in one fell swoop, with that many concentrated in a single location. It's a mind-boggling amount of data. And this is just a spammer sitting there. We don't, is this a typical spammer? Is this an extreme example? Anyway, those are my speculative questions. The above examples are by no means exhaustive. Rather, they're intended to illustrate just how diverse the data is. It helps explain both the massive number of records and the inevitable responses I'll get of there are addresses in there which aren't real. It also illustrates how broad the sources of data inevitably are. Finding yourself in this data set, unfortunately, doesn't give you much insight into where your email was obtained from, nor what you can actually do about it. He has no idea how his service got mine, but even for me, with all the data I am seeing, what I do, there is still a moment when I went, this helps explains all the spam I get. That's the unfortunate reality for all of us. Our email addresses are a simple commodity that's shared and traded with reckless abandon, used by unscrupulous parties to bombard us with everything from Viagra offers to promises of a Nigerian prince wealth. That, unfortunately, is life on the web today.
That is so true. It's a different web we live in.
It is. I remember when I used to get really upset by spam, and now, no, not anymore.
Yeah, spam
is still annoying.
It's still annoying. Yeah, but that with privacy, with security risks, it's, you have to watch yourself and take active defense to make sure that you're not going to be taken advantage of or vulnerable. Well, I'm sure glad Troy Hunt's done this work because it's really interesting to try to get an insight into what's going on here and how these operations are working.
I'll leave you with this one last sentence that he's got, that he had to say here. For this particular incident, if you're creating strong, unique passwords on each service, bracket, get a password manager if you don't already have one, close bracket, and using multi-step verification wherever possible, I wouldn't be at all worried. If you're not, now's a great time to start.
I don't think I could say that any better. So we'll move right on to our final sponsor this evening, and that's our friends over at DigitalOcean. Maybe you're thinking about, you don't want to use one of those big name password managers. You want to set one up yourself because you're a TechSnap viewer, and that's what you do. DigitalOcean's a great place for that. You can spin up a VPS in 55 seconds, or maybe even less than that. They're pretty snappy over there. And when you use our promo code SNAPOcean, all one word, lowercase, you'll get a $10 credit. That makes it super simple to get started. So DigitalOcean will let you seamlessly manage your infrastructure. You can deploy in seconds. They've got all SSDs. They were some of the first to be all in on the SSD bandwagon, and it really shows. It's very mature. They know what they're doing. They know the performance characteristics, and disk speeds are crazy. Just go spin up a droplet, do a sudo apt-get upgrade. You'll see what I'm talking about. Not only that, you'll see as well their incredible bandwidth. They've got 40 gigabit E right to the hypervisors. That also shows they've got great transit, great peering operations. So whether you need to, set up a VPN for yourself at home, or you just want to make sure your package downloads are really fast, DigitalOcean has got that covered. They've also got a great API. They really dogfooded. They build their site on their API. Their apps and official libraries are built on it, and a whole bunch of community-supported apps and libraries are built on it too. We use it here at the show. I use it in my own life. It makes it super simple to manage, update, deploy, snapshot, just whatever you need to do with your droplets. They've also got a bunch of premium cloud features you've come to expect from, some of the other big name cloud service providers. Things like attachable block storage, cloud firewall, so you don't have to fight with IP tables, load balancing, monitoring, and a bunch more. Things like high CPU droplets, and something I'm excited about, they're working on object storage. So look for that coming to a DigitalOcean data center near you sometime soon. They've also got an incredible community. So not only will they provide you the actual, infrastructure you need to build your next startup, business, or just personal project, they're also going to make sure that you have the resources to do it. So from anything like one-click apps, they got a ton of those. So if you just want to deploy a new WordPress server, own cloud instance, Nextcloud, those are all there. You can click one button, get that all set up, or you want to roll it yourself. They've got incredible community curated guides. They have real editors that take community contributions and turn those into some of the best documentation on the internet. These days, you search for just about anything, you're probably going to find a DigitalOcean article about it. That's I think that just really says a lot about DigitalOcean, how they know, the community they're working with, they know their customer base, and they want to make it easy, simple, and fun for you. So don't waste any time, whether you want to just have somewhere to store some backups, you need a box so that you don't have to run cron jobs on a server at home, or you want to set up a new VPN. DigitalOcean is a perfect place to do it, and you can get started with promo code SNAPOcean. That'll get you a $10 credit, probably pay for your first 2 months because prices start at just $5 a month. Yeah, that's right. You get a whole 512 MB of memory, 1 vCPU, that's no slouch, 20 gigs of all SSD disk, and 1 terabyte of transfer. So what are you waiting for? I don't think anything. DigitalOcean.com, promo code SNAPOcean. That'll let them know you appreciate them sponsoring this TechSnap program. Thank you to DigitalOcean. All right, well, that's it for the main segment today. Time for some feedback.
Indeed.
Okay, so is this last one from you or from a audience member? The power
The last
adapter
one.
or the converter?
Yeah, someone had written in asking about it.
Okay.
Where did it come from? It came from an email. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
Let me find the email.
Okay.
Yeah. He just emailed in. He didn't actually give feedback, so he hasn't there's no agreement to say what he said online.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so I'll just amend the show notes to say, hey, can you do this? Oh, forgot where we hear it. There we go. Does that make more sense now?
Yes, it does. That's perfect.
So I'll just get a link to episode 344 and put it in the show notes as well. I do like providing links. Yeah, we'll mention that, I've got it. It has powered up the drive. I've seen the drive on the system, but I haven't actually tried to erase it or use it.
All right, so there we go. I think I'm ready here. You ready?
Yes.
And that brings us to today's feedback, the time where we look in the mailbag, see what's accumulated over the week, and get to hear from you, our wonderful audience. First up, we've got a letter from Brad. Hey, Wes and Dan, I wanted to point out something and ask a question. It sounds great. So first, in reference to Christopher Valerio's question on ZFS on his laptop in episode 322, I agree 100% with Dan. That's a common occurrence around here. I'm a Linux refugee, thanks to Systemd, who has been running PCBSD, now TrueOS, for almost 3 years. I will admit systemd drove me away from Linux, but it was native ZFS and boot environments that kept me there. I run TrueOS on both my laptop, a Lenovo T530, and my desktop, an old quad-core AMD. I have a single drive in my laptop so far, but in my desktop, the primary Z pool is on a pair of 256 gig SSDs, and I have a pair of 1 terabyte spinning drives for larger, bulkier things like jails, ports, and whatnot. Having said that, I've considered buying another 480 gig SSD for my laptop, but since I'm doing ZFS sends to my FreeNAS box, I've not felt the need to set up mirroring. The other thing is that I hope Dan misspoke regarding RAID Z in, I believe it was episode 321. I thought I heard you say that you needed an odd number of drives for a RAID Z2. I always thought it was an odd number for RAID Z3, or RAID Z, 3 drives or more, an even number, 4 or more for a Z2 array, and 5 or more for Z3. Am I incorrect here? I always thought it was an even number of data drives plus the number of parity drives, and that the number of data drives should be even. Am I wrong here as well? I don't recall my FreeNAS complaining about the drive selection for the 4 drives. Thanks, Brad. Hey, thank you, Brad. That's some great feedback. I'm glad you're having a good time on TrueOS. The boot environments are pretty slick, and nice to know it's working well on your Lenovo and your AMD. So that's great to hear. What say you, Dan, about some of his other feedback?
If I said that, I should be punished.
We'll take you out in the back, shoot you.
It's wrong. Google for something called RAID Z width enjoy worrying, or probably just RAID Z width worrying. What you'll find,
Delphix here.
Yep. What you'll find is a post by Matt Aarons, which is pretty much considered to know a fair bit about ZFS.
I should think so.
Given that Matt was involved with the original writing of it and is still involved with the development of it. So basically, to summarize, use RAID Z, not too wide, enable compression. So basically, don't worry about it. If you're using an even number or an odd number, it doesn't really matter. That's the long and the short of it. For example, I have 2 10-drive clusters, one of which is RAID Z3 and one of which is RAID Z2. I have another cluster which is 6 drives of RAID Z2. So some are even and some are odd, and it's not that big of a deal now that we have compression available, because compression throws everything out. Before you had compression, it sort of made a difference, but it doesn't make any difference, significant difference. It's not something to worry about. So have a read of that article. Choose a RAID Z, the TLDR that I just came across. Choose a RAID Z stripe based upon your IOPS needs and the amount of space you're willing to devote to parity information. If you need more IOPS, use further drives per stripe. If you need more usable space, use more drives per stripe. So that is if you're using a Z, yeah. Try to optimize your RAID Z stripe width based on exact numbers is irrelevant in nearly all cases. I'll say that again. Trying to optimize your RAID Z stripe width based on exact numbers is irrelevant in nearly all cases. So I'm not going to go into all the details, but have a read of this. Tell me what you think for the next show, and we'll follow up on this. But basically, don't worry about it. Don't worry about the width. Not too wide. Don't go 2,400 drives, but generally don't worry about it.
Nice. I like that. Good advice and a good article find there. Okay.
It is. What was the date on this? I don't see it, but it's been around for a while. This has been quoted more than
I don't see a date here either. But
in recent years.
Excellent. A handy resource. Okay, so next up, we have got a letter from Thomas regarding Bacula. Hey, a topic we haven't touched on for a little while here. Hello, guys. It's time to start planning our Bacula server upgrade. The current director is version 7.05 on FreeBSD 10.3. Is there a way to update to each version with package, PKG, or can I go straight to Bacula server v747? I'm reading on blog bacula.org category releases to see what changes were made, etc. It looks like that's the release notes. Are the notes there good enough for the upgrade process, or is there anything else I should be aware of? I assume I need to buy some new Bacula FD binaries. And the director and storage daemon has to be the same version, I also assume. Does that go for the file daemons too, or can I get away without changing all file daemon installs? Also, did something change with Bacula v9 that means it will not become available for FreeBSD package install? Thanks, Thomas. Thank you, Thomas. All right, Dan, you're definitely the Bacula expert here. I'm going to throw this one right over to you.
All right, we'll start with the last question. Stuff did change with version 9, but I've been holding off on developing the port, and it just went into the FreeBSD ports tree yesterday. So you asked your question before I had completed that work. So that makes that question moot. You do have version 9 available. No, you don't need new file daemon binaries. The general rule is the SD, the storage daemon, and the director both need to be on the same version. Always, always, always. Never have them on different versions. But they can be greater than or equal to the version of your file daemons. They go through a lot of effort to make sure that the servers are backward compatible with the clients. So I believe I still have clients running very old versions. You'll find out if you try to take advantage of some of the new features that are only in the newer clients. But
oh, that makes sense.
You'll find out right away.
But if you don't need that, you'll be fine.
If you don't start using the new features, if you just use the features that were available in the version you're running now, you will be fine. So provided you make no other changes to your configuration, just keep using the old binaries. Now, the upgrade process, yes, there is a file that you want to look at. It has the DDL upgrades that you need to run on the database. And sometimes it's just a matter of updating one table just to say, hey, now we're in version X of the database.
Oh, that's nice. They provide that. That keeps it handy.
Yeah. So it is installed by the port. If you do package info -L, and then the port name, it'll list the files that are installed, and you're looking for update or upgrade. I can't remember which it is, but that is also documented. But the output of that file will tell you where to find it on disk. And it's under user local share Bacula, I believe, from memory. But yeah, 9.03 is in the tree now. I've been running it in a test environment for, I think, a week or two.
Oh, awesome.
And it's running every night, and I just haven't got around to upgrading my own servers yet. Soon.
That's great.
I hope.
Thanks for doing that. That's wonderful. Okay, so thank you, Thomas, for writing in. I'll be curious to hear how your upgrade goes. Do let us know.
Yes.
So it also, a last bit of feedback, it seems like we did not include the link to the device you were talking about in episode 334. Here we have it. Tell us a little bit more about it. Maybe summarize if anyone's watching this episode and hasn't watched that one.
So I've talked about this 3 terabyte to 5 terabyte upgrade, and while I've been going through that, I've decided to erase all those hard drives and put them up for sale on eBay. And while I was doing that, I found a bunch of other old drives that have been sitting around, some of which are IDE, and I haven't used IDE in years. I found one motherboard with an IDE interface on it, but I found no this is fun. I found no IDE cables anywhere in my house. None whatsoever.
Wow.
I think I tossed them all out because they've been sitting in a box for years. So I thought about buying a cable, but then buying this little adapter proved to be cheaper than buying the cable. And the adapter is just something that, say, I can plug into the back of the laptop or the computer that's sitting on the table in the living room. And I can then plug in the hard drive to this unit. It shows up on my USB 3 connection, and I can wipe it from there. Now, it's arrived, and I powered up some drives, and they've showed up on the system, but I actually haven't tried.
Broadcasting.com/contact. There's our contact page. You can fill that form out. That sends us a letter. We'll put it up here on the show. Or you can go to techsnap.reddit.com. That's the subreddit. Or find us both on Twitter. Lots of ways to communicate, so we hope to see you in next week's feedback. Okay, roundup time.
Roundup. This first item in the roundup is the one I referred to earlier.
Oh, yeah.
About ISPs knowing when you're awake.
Look at that.
And where is it? They say, yeah, 40K a second is enough to confuse them.
Wow.
40K, if you had a download of 40K a second, you'd be disgusted. So it's not a big file.
No, totally not. That's funny. Get this ready.
I was going to say, see your lips moving, but I don't hear any noise. But that's because you're not actually saying anything.
No, just miming to myself. All right, let's do it. You ready?
Yes.
Okay. And it's time for the roundup, the final segment in today's show. These are some stories that we didn't have time to put in the main segment, but they're still worth talking about. Lots of fun stuff, so let's jump right in. First up, over at TechCrunch, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but internet providers could easily snoop on your smart home. I don't like the sounds of that, Dan. How about you?
Yep. Well, I do have some smart devices in my house, but I don't know how much this is going to help them. I know that if you see a lot of traffic coming from Netflix, you're pretty well convinced that somebody's home. If you see a lot of traffic coming from, say, a video camera, maybe someone's looking at the video camera. Or if you see a lot of traffic headed to, say, sleepnumber.com or their whatever website they actually use for tracking sleep data, then chances are the person has just gone to sleep. So that's what they're getting at here. To quote, it's a pretty straightforward attack. The Internet of Things devices often identify themselves voluntarily, usually by connecting to specific domains or URLs. Even if they didn't, there are simple ways of profiling them based on observation and some known data. The researchers demonstrated this by showing us that various devices show distinct patterns of data transmission. So they talk about the amount of traffic and the mean traffic and where it goes, and they can actually see that, okay, this is a Sense sleep monitor, this is a Nest security camera, this is a Belkin WEMO switch, or this is an Armcrest security camera, and so on. Now, it goes, by watching a sleep tracker, the ISP can see when the user gets in bed and wakes up, perhaps even how well they sleep or whether they get up in the middle of the night, and so on, because these devices phone home with the data.
Yikes.
Now, but don't worry, there's actually a pretty good solution, and I'm quoting here. They suggest a constant stream of around 40K per second should be more than enough to get rid of all this ability for them to monitor it. This basically is traffic shaping, as it's called, and it doesn't prevent the devices from working. Many of them work surprisingly well with artificially slowed connections, but it does make it hard for an attacker to tell signal from noise. Even if all they see is the volume, they don't know where it's going.
Oh, yeah. See, that makes a lot of sense, and that seems like a pretty useful tactic. I wonder how we get this, in an easy way into the hands of your average consumer. Maybe it's just another IoT device you buy that just sits on the network making meaningless noise.
Yeah. I can see a market developing for that.
All right. Well, we'll have to start that after the show. Okay, so in the spirit of that, so we can try to make some money here. No, I'm just kidding. Let's move on though.
Yes.
The very dirty history of on-demand video technology.
Yes.
Promise we're not involved though. No, not us.
Yes. This is historical. This article is from earlier this month, but they talk about how in the early 70s, a very well-known hotel in New York City, it was the Hotel Commodore. The first experiments were done with custom video delivery at that time. So the motels were explicit about what separated them from a generic family motor lodge. Advertisements encouraged patrons to rent rooms for a few days or a few hours, and guests could unwind in luxury and privacy, watching X-rated films in their own rooms rather than going to theaters, peep shows, or arcades. That said, a person spotted checking into an adult motel could no more argue their innocence than if they were spotted going into a peep show in an adult movie theater. So people raided these hotels regularly, etc. So that's where the Hotel Commodore made headlines. This is a legitimate hotel for ordinary guests. So basically, they had all this technology. The player's system, called the Movie Box, uses playback units with cartridges containing 12 packs of 12 minutes each. Thus, movies of up to 2 hours and 24 minutes can be put on one cartridge. The Movie Box, with the desired cartridge already installed, was delivered by a bellman to a room upon request. Guests could play it via a projection system made by Zeiss Icon, I remember. Thus, representatives of the hotel stressed would allow responsible hotel employees to make sure that no children saw whatever movie was out. It was custom content delivered to your door. So it's not quite what I thought it was going to be when I started reading it. But basically, they deliver the movie to your room. You play the movie in your room. So the X-rated titles generally outsold the family fare, at least according to the hotel's general manager, and that's not remarkable.
No, it's not.
What was remarkable was that the hotel sold both. A family could watch Beware of the Blob in one room while a businessman watched blah, 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 blah. The only problem was space. If they showed The Godfather, half an hour of running time would have to be edited out in order for the movie to fit on the cartridge.
Oh, yeah, that is a problem.
So anyway, I just found this interesting from a historical point of view of how they used to distribute this stuff and the technology that they used it for. They used for it, sorry. And they've got a great photograph here of the Sony U-Matic in all its analog glory. And that device was used in the early 70s to stream X-rated video to hotel rooms, which is different from what the Commodore did earlier on.
Right. Yeah, it seems like an interesting system, and it's neat that there was demand for it. It's a little slice of history I had not heard of.
Exactly.
Right, a great roundup item. Okay, on to the next one. Maybe you, as a TechSnap user, have heard of Docker. I'm sure you have. We've certainly talked about it, as it's very popular these days. You might want to know about hardening Docker hosts with user namespaces.
Yeah, I can't comment on to whether or not this is a good approach or not. I know some people that are very active in the Docker area. Perhaps they can let me know. But basically, there's been a lot of controversy about Docker and how you have to be very careful to make sure that one doesn't interfere with another. If all you're deploying is one Docker application, I think it's not as challenging. But if you've got two Dockers running on the same machine, I'm not really sure how that works. Have you used this stuff before? Can you comment on this area?
Generally, that's if it should be fine. It mostly becomes a problem if you're trying to do some kind of custom stuff with namespacing, or if you want to have user namespaces, like separate Docker containers that are separate in privileges and have separate user remappings for each one. You may have to be a little bit careful. I think the tooling support is still being evolved for that, so that it works well and works nicely. And different distros or setups of it kind of have different ways that it's done, or different different requirements. Some don't have user namespaces enabled by default in the kernel, for instance. Some do. Historically, it's a good and necessary feature, I think, for more security, so that were a process to escape from the container, they won't have root on the host system, and that can go a long way to helping to increase container security and trust. But because the kernel is evolving its way to these features, and it wasn't in there from the beginning, this has been one of the harder namespaces to get right in the kernel. So it has historically been a source of vulnerabilities. But these days it's looking pretty good. I think we haven't seen a major one for a little while, and I think in a lot of cases it can provide real security benefit. And this guide talks about that, some of the pros, some of the cons, and things you might want to consider.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
It's one of the features, by adding this on, the containers come closer to what you're used to with jails, and having root isolated in the jail. Yeah.
I'll be keen to see where this goes.
Yeah, definitely. Something we can try to pay attention to on further episodes of TechSnap. Okay, so on to the final bit of Roundup today. ZSH configuration from the ground up.
What was that you said?
ZSH.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not familiar with that word.
You're right. Isn't it ZSH? But I think that's harder to say for this one.
Okay.
Maybe not.
I have never used this shell. I've never installed it. I've never used it. I think it comes pre-installed. I'm not sure. I'm not absolutely positive.
What shell do you find yourself using?
Bash.
Okay, yeah.
And the only reason I used Bash is because I asked someone, hey, how can I get command line history here? I don't have any.
Huh.
And I'm not actually sure. There's a user local etc shells file. Or is it? Or is it /etc shells? There's a file which tells you which shells are already installed. Yes, there it is. etc shells. And note TCH is installed by default.
Right.
But
yes.
ZSH is not. Huh. I also have rbash and git shell. But no, I have not used this. A coworker uses it. And just skimming through this article, it sounds like you can do an incredible amount of customization.
Yes, definitely. It's very powerful. It has lots of powerful features like globbing features. Some of them, Bash has grown as well if you have a recent version of Bash. So you can look to that as well. But I think ZSH has a wider proliferation of configs and other settings, and it's a little bit easier and has some more advanced features. I used to use it a fair amount. One nice thing about it is that it's a superset of Bash, so you can still run Bash scripts. A lot of the commands are the same, so if you use Bash on a large variety of systems, then it works well for that. A competing shell that I've also used is Fish, which is the friendly interactive shell. One of the differences there, Fish also has a lot of features that ZSH has, but generally comes with a lot more, I don't know if they're sane or not, but the defaults are very friendly, so you don't have to configure a lot to get started with Fish, but it's not completely backwards compatible with Bash, so you will learn some differences that won't apply when you're on a Bash system. So if you want some advanced features but still need to be Bash friendly, ZSH may be the way to go.
I've never tried it. I've also never done Bash scripting ever.
Is that right?
That's right. It's always been Bourne shell.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you need to run it on a variety of systems that may or may not have Bash, then that's pretty handy. In the Linux world, I think Bash scripts get run a fair amount, and they take advantage of some of the the niceties that come with that, like the arithmetic context or double brackets for tests and those such things. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter.
No, code it in whatever shell you like. I tend to use the Bourne shell for shell scripts just because that's the standard thing to do.
It's a very good common denominator as well. You'll find it on a lot of systems, and it's pretty easy to use. Excellent. Well, hopefully this helps with people. I'm sure there are people that are interested. If you have a shell that we didn't mention here, or you just want to tell us about, the shells of your choice, please write in and let us know. That's going to do it for today's TechSnap. Thank you very much for joining us. You want to find more? Go to jupiterbroadcasting.com. There you'll find the archive of our Here Live and the live stream itself, the IRC chat room, and the contact page. That's the important one right there. There you can send us letters. We'll put it here in the feedback segment. We'll get to have a nice dialogue going back and forth. One of my favorite parts of doing this show is connecting with you guys out there in the audience. If you want to do that in other ways, there's techsnap.reddit.com, or we're both on Twitter. I'm at Wes Payne. He's at techsnap_Dan. Anything you want to say before we get out of here, Mr. Dan?
Tell us what your favorite shell is and why it's the one true shell.
Exactly. A challenge for you. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
All right.
How are you guys doing for time? Do you usually start your next show at 2?
I think today it starts at noon. It's Coda Radio.
At noon. Okay, so 2, you get an hour and a half.
Yeah, and thankfully I don't have to do this one, so I just get to go back to work.
Why do you don't have to do it? What's going on? Oh, right, it's a different day. Sorry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mr. Michael Dominic has to work. All right, so I don't know what you want to do. We have only title suggestions from me, which is fine because we're doing a weird show.
I've already put it in there.
Oh, okay, beautiful. So I can just write a tease here.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay. Coming up on this week's episode of TechSnap, we're extending your file system's usefulness with extended attributes. We take a look at just what they are and how they might be useful. Plus, we take a behind-the-scenes look at the operations of a major spam bot and check in with Bruce Schneier on the state of internet privacy. Plus, we've got your fantastic feedback, a rockin' roundup, and so much more on this week's episode of TechSnap.
That seemed good.
Yeah? All right. Well, then we can get out of here.
Ha 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 ha.
Easy.
Does Rikai get any say?
think he might be asleep. We'll find out.
That's really? Is he
I
asleep?
doubt it. He mentioned
No,
he
no.
might want to take a nap.
Yeah, he did talk about naps.
I mean, and I'm jealous. I like naps. I think they're great. Oh, I should see about ending this. I don't know if he was watching though.
Chris said it looked good. We're done.
All right, yeah, he's the real boss here. Okay.
Just he wants to tweak the profile, go to reruns, standby
Roger
Splash.
that.
When did they start their show? Not for a while yet.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll get out of here. We'll do some tweaking, eventually reruns, and then later today, expect a Coder Radio. That's always fun. I know I'll be listening. Thanks very much for joining me today, Dan.
See you. Thank you for coming in early.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll see you in 2 weeks, or
2 weeks,
a little less than that, but
on the Tuesday. Do you want to go for the earlier time on that Tuesday?
yeah, that's fine. I think that worked pretty well in the last.
Okay, so that's 11:30 to 2:30 my time.
Yeah.
11:30 to 1:30. Yeah.
Okay.
That works
Yeah, I think so.
because it's just like a long lunch hour, and I don't usually get meetings before 2.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Okay, I'll change my calendar.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. See you then.
Bye.
Thank you, audience, for joining us. Stay tuned. We'll have some more excellent JB content coming right up.